Okay. All right. So because we have a time restraint, we do these for 30 minutes. It's kind of as a lunch break webinar series. I'd like to get started, and we are happy to have our presenter today, Steven Hankoff. Steven began his career in 1979 with Hankoff and Company. However, in 1985, he began to get involved with the management of the company, and then in 1991, he formed Hankoff Insurance Group, and then he purchased Hankoff and Company. So since then, he's been the president, and he has increased revenue from 2.75 million to over $8 million and growing. So we are very happy to have Steven with us. He is going to be explaining business interruption insurance, which I'm sure all of us wish we had had in various times of our business. So Steven, I don't want to take up any more time. A couple little housekeeping things. You can use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, or it might be at the top of your screen, if you have any questions. And at the end, I will send those questions over to Steven to get some really good, insightful answers. So Steven, it is all you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Business Interruption Seminar. Yes, I definitely want to encourage any questions you may have about business interruption insurance. So the topic says, business interruption, what is it and do I need it? Business interruption coverage, it's also known as loss of income coverage, is a very important coverage, and it really is relatively inexpensive. I think basically every business needs it in one form or another. The coverage pays for your profit and your continuing fixed expenses until you're back in business after a shutdown due to a covered property loss. Now that covered property loss is key, and it has to happen at your location. So for example, a covered property loss would be fire, lightning, windstorm, hail, smoke, explosion, vandalism, etc. etc. Most businesses do get business interruption coverages from either a business owner's policy or a package or property policy. So in order to be eligible for a business owner's policy, there are certain type of industry restrictions, such as you have to be the retail, wholesale, office class, and some service classes. And there's also size restrictions that vary by insurance company. Some may be based on gross sales, some are based on the property limit that you have. So with a business owner's policy, it's much simpler. You don't need to calculate the limit. They include 12 months of coverage on an actual loss sustained basis, which means there's no dollar limitation. There are a few exceptions where there's a couple companies that provide that coverage but may have $1 million limit. But there's still no monthly limit, and it's a really, really broad coverage. So a lot of times with property policies, you're used to deductibles. With business interruption coverage, there is no dollar deductible, but instead they have various waiting periods that can go from anywhere from 0 hours to 72 hours. And with some companies, you don't have a choice, but some companies you do. So they may automatically include the 72, but you could buy it down to a 0 hour waiting period. In this policy form, you also have coverage for extra expense, and that pays for the option to get you open sooner and pays for the additional expenses to get you open sooner, whether it be overnighting equipment that you lost, inventory that you lost, whether you make the decision that, hey, maybe it's going to take over a year to rebuild this building, I can move somewhere else. If you don't own the building, you may just opt to go some other place. If your business doesn't qualify for business owner's policy, you will most likely need to determine the proper coverage limit with your agent. If you're a landlord, it's pretty simple. Basically, take your rent rolls and multiply them by the number of months that you would think it would take to replace your own building. And at that point, add any continuing expenses along with the rent rolls. Now, for more complex businesses such as manufacturer, there are business income worksheets available to help you estimate your limit. For other businesses, a simple rule of thumb, you could basically base it off your gross sales. So if you think it would take a year to rebuild your building, you take 12 months of expenses, you just take your annual sales, take back the profit, and add in the fixed expenses. With this type of policy form, which is the non-business owners form, you do have some flexibility in deciding which expenses you want to cover. Some businesses may want to include their ordinary payroll for all their employees. Some may not. Some may choose to have a monthly limitation. Some may not. So the more limiting, the less expensive the coverage. So you do have various options. So now remember, since business income is a property coverage, the coverage is triggered by a loss to your property at your specific location. And there are quite a few other losses that you can happen to your business that will shut you down without loss to your property at your location. Not all of these things are available for coverage, but several are, and at a separate limit. Let me give an example. Utility services interruption. Remember, this is specific to a location. So let's say a storm hits and knocks down trees and power lines down the street from your business, but not at your location. Would your policy respond? The answer is no, unless you have it endorsed to include utility services time element coverage. It is not automatic, but it is pretty much readily available with most companies. And there you would select your limit. Sometimes it's with these business owners packages, again, they'll give you options of a $10,000 limit, a $25,000 limit, and some companies actually will allow you to purchase whatever limit you want. How about civil authority? If there's riots and the businesses are shut down, not because your location was hit, but the municipality may inflict a curfew, and therefore you have to shut down your business when you don't want to. Again, most policies will include this, not all, and there is going to be at a sublimit of usually either $10,000 or $25,000, and a lot of companies will not let you purchase more. So you just have to be prepared, for that instance. How about a cyber attack? If you got hacked and your website is shut down and you lose business, is that going to be covered? The only way that's going to be covered is if you have a cyber liability policy. Business income can be added to that policy. How about flood insurance? So basic flood insurance for your business is going to give you coverage for your loss of property, whether it's your building or your contents, but it's not going to include business interruption coverage. Can you get it? Well, nowadays there's actually private flood insurance besides the FEMA federal government flood insurance. So on the private flood, there are companies that will offer it. The FEMA does not. FEMA is always changing every few years. They have to vote on it to keep it going, and changes may apply. So in the future, it could be available, but now you really need to go to the private flood market if you think that's a real possibility for your business. So lately, I'm sure you've seen a lot of articles about business closing because of the pandemic. And I can certainly take any questions on that, but I'm going to tell you why it's not covered. There have been suits, and so far every suit has upheld the policy provisions. So the policy specifically requires the damage to property at your location. So with the pandemic, has your property been damaged? No. Also, these policies do have specifically exclusions stating that viruses, bacteria, and those types of things are not going to be covered by business interruption or property of any kind. Now, does anybody have any questions on these or want to know specifically about different types of businesses?
I have a question for you. This is Kathleen. So is there any kind of insurance that can cover something that just happened to us for the last 6 months?
So what is it? What is the, it depends, see, it's triggered by the peril of what happened. Oh, you're talking about the pandemic.
The pandemic, yeah.
No, there's no, unless you're somebody like a Capital Grill or that's got multiple locations where you can basically negotiate the clauses of your contract, you're not going to get it. It's going to have to go through like a Lloyd's of London, possibly down the road, but it's been standardly excluded on 99.9% of the policies out there. And there have not been any ways to get it. Now, that may be negotiated in the future. My hopes all along during this pandemic is that the federal government would have the insurance companies cover it, but then reimburse them. Insurance companies are the best at determining the value of the loss, since they do this all the time for other reasons, but that never came to fruition. But that would be a, just how they back flood insurance. If they could back business interruption for a pandemic, it would be a great solution. But at this point, it's still not available.
Okay, we have a hand raised. Jeffrey Cohn, you have been unmuted if you'd like to answer or ask your question.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Steve, I guess you've mentioned a couple of times things where things are excluded, but can you give us a couple of scenarios where somebody had the insurance and then was denied, and why?
Well, everyone who's been denied on the pandemic has insurance, and there is no way to get it. Had their business been burned down, had a sprinkler leakage or a pipe burst, and they've had to close, had they had, vandalized, had theft of all their merchandise, and they had to restore, replace everything, any of those things would be covered. And that happens all the time. It's not a simple thing to determine, because basically to determine how much you get, they take your sales this year versus last year and the year before. They look at trends to see how you're faring versus prior years, how you're doing versus the rest of the businesses in your type of industry. And then they interpolate the data and figure out how much your loss is. Now, one thing I know there's some contractors here. Contractors are more, the business interruption kind of coverage for them is called extra expense coverage. It's more likely that you guys, like a contractor, can operate anywhere. They can just operate out of a trailer if necessary, because all their business is done somewhere else. So with them, you can choose the extra expense and not the standard business income, and just figured like how much it would cost you additionally to have to order a trailer, to move to a new location, to have whatever merchandise you lost that you might have stored, or equipment that you keep stored replaced, or you may have to rent equipment instead of using equipment you had. So all these things are these things are normally covered. It's just those other things that are not.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeffrey, for asking that question. That is an important topic to make sure that we go over. I have a question about cybersecurity. I think no matter if you own a building or not, if you work in your home, doesn't matter, you are on the computer, and you most likely have sensitive information, whether it's credit card information or whatever that is, on your computer, and as you work with your clients. So can you explain the coverage with cybersecurity a little bit more? Like, what kind of things will they cover, and what kind of thing, like, do we have to prove that we have a cyber attack policy, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's some companies that will throw in like a very minimal cyber security, like a $25,000 coverage. So when you have to take due diligence to protect your customer information and also your employees' information. So if you happen to be hacked and you do get information stolen, you then are subject to fines from the governments, and the fines vary by state. You also have to pay for credit monitoring for people that have been hacked, and you have to try to restore everything and everyone and assist in restoring people's credit. So depending on how you're hacked, you can suffer business interruption losses. So again, to get a loss of business income, that today's topic is about, for a hack, for a cyber breach, you do need to have that type of policy. But there is quite a bit other coverage in there. You get the coverage for the fines. You may be sued by a client of yours that a customer of yours that's information was stolen. You may also run into a situation where you have ransom. They're going to hold you. They can get into your site. This has happened to hospitals, universities, where they've hacked the computer and lock everyone out, and you have to pay a ransom to get back in. So these cyber policies, there are various different levels of them, but those types of coverage are all available in that cyber liability market.
The city of Baltimore, I think, needed that ransom coverage, huh? Because that was a disaster.
Yeah, and I forgot which hospital it was. I think it was MedStar had a similar situation.
Mm-hmm. And something to also think about, I know of a company that does work for a very, very large pharmaceutical company. So they have to be careful about being attacked, because there could be other countries trying to get in to find out what this pharmaceutical company is doing. So even though they think they might be small potatoes, their clients are very large, and they could be kind of on the target list for hacking. So you kind of have to, even though we might think that you are a small company, you have to be really careful about that, I think, and we forget about that.
Absolutely. It's if you just think about how much budgets these big companies and universities have for cybersecurity and to protect themselves from these hacks, yet they are still able to be hacked. So a lot of the smaller businesses are being attacked because they figure they're going to have those kind of budgets. They're not going to have the cybersecurity budget to protect themselves that the larger businesses do. So and you can't just buy cybersecurity policy. You have to qualify. You have to take measures to get the coverage. So you have to have a firewall. You have to have virus protection up to date all the time. You have to have encryption of certain things. So it's not just, well, I'll just buy this and not worry about it. You do have to be prudent in order to get that type of coverage.
So some examples of reasons that your business will be interrupted. You did give us a nice list of that. So could you kind of expand on maybe one or two that you see have happened the most in your many decades of experience, that and maybe some that happened that people wish they had this insurance for?
Well, the two most prevalent causes of that loss are fire, because depending on the devastation of the fire, it takes forever to rebuild. You have to go through getting permits for every step of the way, and depending on whether or not how much of your building was damaged, how much if that building was up to code, this was called building ordinance, you may have to demolish the entire building and then rebuild it. And one of the things that's also frustrating as a business owner, a lot of times if you don't own your own building, you're at the mercy of the landlord. They may decide, well, I'm not in a rush to do this. I may want to upgrade the building. I may want to, do this, do that. I may want to expand the building. I may, depending on your lease also, a lot of these leases may or may not have a rent abatement clause. They may have, the landlord may be able to terminate your lease upon damage to the building, and then you're scrambling to find a new situation. So it's important to know what your lease says, because they're certainly not standard, and they do protect the landlord for the most part. in those leases. So, and the other one besides fire that's happens a lot is water damage. You have a pipe that bursts. It used to be, pretty easy cleanup, but now in the last 20 years, mold has really become a prevalent problem. And if you don't act quickly, the mold can spread and you have to tear down a lot more and treat it and replace. So those claims can really drag on. Water damage and fire just drag on more than anything else. Theft, pretty much you need to reorder what you needed. Same thing with smoke damage. As long, they just got to scrub the walls and do whatever is necessary and repaint. But when you have structural damage with water and with fire, you'd be surprised how long these claims drag on.
That's interesting. And that's something I would not have thought of, that landlords can kind of drag their feet and they might have their own reasons to do that. But in the meantime, you don't have a location, you don't have a business. So that is very important to think about. This is kind of last call for some questions. We're wrapping up our time. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you can send them in. I think that we have learned a lot about business interruption insurance. And unfortunately, if you don't have it, you wish you're going to need it when you need it. So, when the electricity goes down in a hurricane and it's not going to be up for a week, or, whatever those situations are, you're going to look back and wish that you had this. So, Steve, if you can give them an idea on what to look for in a policy, like what are some things that you want to make sure that are in your policy when you're reviewing it, that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, so key things, so again, if you're on a business owner's policy, a lot of it is predetermined for you and included. But the things that you want to make sure that you do have is utility services interruption, especially if you're a restaurant. The health department's not going to let you operate if you don't have water. Most businesses are so computerized that you're not going to be able to operate if you don't have electricity. You may have backups for a certain amount of time, but you're not going to be able to operate without electricity, especially any retail as well, where you won't have your point of sale systems working. Websites will be down. So those are, that's a very important coverage that you need to make sure you have is utility services interruption. And the other part, again, I highly recommend is a cyber liability, and you can include the business interruption in there along with all the varying levels of coverage.
Excellent. Okay, well, is there any other parting words you'd like to leave with us so that we can make sure that we are covered and safe in these kind of situations?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you think of questions later. You can reach me. My office is 410-356-0400. My extension is 122. And feel free to email me as well. It's steve@hankoffinsurance.com. That's HANKOFF. And insurance is all spelled out. It really is an inexpensive coverage. It's based on, the rates are usually based on the building that you're in. So if you're in a sprinkler fire resistant building, it's going to be minimal. If you're in a frame building, it's going to be, more money. But again, it's so insignificant. Remember, building rates are much less than personal property rates because there's really no theft rating in there and crime rating in a building policy. So it can be the difference between going out of business and not going out of business if you have a serious loss. So it's definitely a coverage that everyone should have in one form or another.
All right, Steve, we need to work on this pandemic coverage too, right?
Yeah, let your legislators know that, it should be available, maybe FEMA backed, but available in the future. Hopefully we don't have to worry about it for another 100 years again, but
yeah,
who knows in this crazy world.
Fingers crossed. Well, I appreciate you coming and giving us your time today, and more than that, even all your decades of experience. And this is a really important topic. So I appreciate you doing that for us, and love to to, hear more from you. So if you guys have any questions that come up after this, feel free to email the chamber, and we can connect you with Hankoff, and you can get covered. So once again, Stephen, thank you. This is recorded, so if you'd like to come back and take a look, you can always do that. You can share the recording to your friends and any other of your connections that you think might get some use out of this. And Brad says, nice job. So there you go. All
Thank
right.
you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And Jeff says thank you, Steve. So we'll sign off, and everybody have a good rest of the week.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.